about all the wildfires that have been happening right now. There's a very big one in California, and the reason why all these wildfires are happening, even though like for that region wildfires are supposed to happen, it's a natural occurrence. But the fact is that since the climate has been a lot drier in those regions, they're having a lot of drought. And drought means that you have a lot of dead trees, and dead trees are basically fuel. So when these wildfires happen, all of a sudden they have a lot more fuel than they're supposed to have, and it turns into a huge problem. And we are seeing that in different factors in different parts around the world. Last year in Brazil, there were some cases of wildfires as well, burning up the Amazon. But that was due to human activity because they wanted to have more land to do agricultural practices, and so they needed to basically clear up parts of the Amazon. And like all these things, you can clearly see that it's not the earth doing it itself. It's clearly driven by human activity. It's clearly driven by the capitalistic nature of our activities and us wanting to produce things cheaper and have a comfortable way of life. Obviously, that should be the goal, but the point is that if you're going to do it the way countries like the UK did it, and countries like the USA did it, where they rely almost entirely on fossil fuels, they rely on coal, they rely on oil, they rely on natural gas. Basically, it's going to have very horrible long-term effects going forward for all of us. So that's why there are a lot of climate activists coming up, because young people are seeing this, and this is the interesting dynamic that they are seeing the effects about these things. And I think young people are a lot more aware because they don't have that incentive to defend the systems that they didn't grow up with. So when they see things and they read reports that say that in the next few years or in the next 30 years, we're going to reach a point where the effects of climate change become irreversible and it's going to have drastic effects on the way we live our lives, all of a sudden it gives people a lot of existential crisis because they begin to worry. And then when they begin to worry and they look around and say that, oh, nothing is changing, like there is no response, because it's almost like someone telling you that there's a certainty that it's going to be a horrible thing happening to you in the next 30 years. And then you look around and you see that nobody's taking action of it. And that is why there's been such a huge response. There's been all these huge protests, and there's like a lot of key figures that have come out around young people around the world who are protesting and are trying to gain a lot of awareness and going past awareness, a lot of action around around climate change. And it's all very it's interesting to see the way it's all been playing out, because like I said before, it's a very multifaceted issue, and most of it as well, just going away from energy, has to do with politics, because I can give many examples, but let me just come back to Nigeria, because I think that's where like most people will be able to like understand it better. A country like Nigeria, for instance, now obviously most of our national revenue comes from the oil and gas industry. So basically, if I tell you that, Mr. Nigeria president, oil is very bad, and burning of fossil fuel and producing fossil fuel is very bad for the environment, would you please stop producing fossil fuel? And I, Mr. Nigeria president, go, no, I can't. Like, my people need that money. Like, we need that revenue to go to producing key infrastructure and developing the country up, because there's no other option. So that kind of gives you an idea of why. That's just one very oversimplified example of why we can't just stop using fossil fuels, because so much of our current system still relies on the fossil fuel markets, still relies on oil and gas. In many places, it relies on coal. If you look at things like transportation, aviation, marine shipping, it's all very closely tied to what the fossil fuel industry is doing. So now there's this thing called the energy transition. It's acknowledging the fact that so much of our energy systems are being tied up by the fossil fuel industry. But how do we get away from that? How do we introduce cleaner energy sources like wind, like solar, like hydropower, like nuclear? And how do we make these things an attractive option? So those developing countries that I mentioned, those almost 2 million people who don't have steady access to energy, when they do want to develop their national grid, they don't turn to coal, they don't turn to fossil fuels, they instead turn to cleaner energy sources. But right now, those clean energy sources aren't in the place where they can be relied on completely to completely substitute the fossil fuel mode of generation. So that's really like a beginner level to what the challenge is right now?
I mean, that's one of the points in the little I've read about it, that some of these so-called sources of cleaner energy are not really as efficient as fossil, as coal,
Mm-hmm.
as I said. So, especially for, African countries and underdeveloped countries, as you said, like Nigeria, a place where you do not have steady power supply and the best reliable source of electricity and all that is, as you said, the diesel generator and all that. So where do we go from here, given that some of these other sources, as you said, are not in the moment as reliable or as efficient as coal and fossil fuels?
So this is now where we can talk about technology because right now, it, using Nigeria again as the example, most of our energy generation obviously comes from fossil fuels. So we're looking like uh, either we have natural gas power plants generating like large scale electricity by local utilities, or you have your own like personal petrol generator at home or your diesel generator. Basically, most of our economy is being fueled by fossil fuels, whether we want to like it or not. And that is just the reality because let's say you have a business and you want to make money in Nigeria, you have to have your own generating capacity because you can't rely on the government to provide you electricity because let's say you have a client coming over and all of a sudden there's no light. It's like, what do? You just look at each other and like, oh well. Like obviously that's not an option. So many Nigerians have become their own generating companies. And right now, a lot of companies have seen the potential for that. So in Nigeria now, solar technology is becoming a lot more popular. You see people with solar panels and battery storage, and since Nigeria has a problem with intermittency, which means that you have power sometimes and sometimes you don't. So people are using that as an opportunity to bring in technologies like inverters, which are very popular right now, and to install solar panels on their house and back it up with battery storage technology because in other places this can't be used as a sole source of electricity generation. But because Nigerians are used to that intermittent supply, and most of them obviously are going to have a backup generator, like a backup power generating system. Like everybody's going to have their own generator. Like depending on what class you are, you're going to have a diesel generator, a petrol generator, or those small better pass my neighbor generators. Are like basically you're going to have something, and you're used to the cycle of when NEPA takes lights, you go to know your generator. So people are used to that cycle, and that's the consumer behavior in Nigeria. So companies are coming in and they're providing you with other backup system options, basically solar home systems. So they install depending on what your capacity is. They can install solar panels on your roof and give you a battery unit that can account for let's say 6 hours in a day. So let's say in a regular day, NEPA likes you and they give you 8 hours of energy, and for the rest of the 6 hours, you have your battery like kicking off. So those accounts for almost all the times when you likely be home. Let's say you're in a busy city like Lagos, most of the time you're going to be at work or stuck in traffic. So that is like how technology is kind of playing a role there. So in Nigeria right now, when it comes to clean technology, solar is a very popular option because it's practical to what the reality is in Nigeria. Because people are used to not having a regular power supply, and most people already know the drill that you need to have something as a backup. And right now, solar is playing that role, but solar technology isn't perfect because most of the problem with solar is that you need to use the electricity you're generating at that moment you're generating it because of one problem: battery storage technology. The batteries are not that good. They can't hold electricity for a very long period of time. So basically, as soon as you store it, there's only a set period of time that you can use that power before it completely disseminates. And if you want better battery technology at this point right now, it's expensive. So when you look at the cost of doing it, let's say you buy a generator and you have to buy petrol for the generator, and it costs you something, but it costs you that over a long period of time. So let's say over the period of 2 to 5 years, you spend like 500,000 naira on your generator. that is over 2 to 5 years. But let's say you want to get a solar home system and you want to get solar panels and a battery to your specifications. There's a much higher upfront cost. So let's say that you have to pay 500,000 naira over 5 years to have a petrol generator or a diesel generator. And to have a solar home system that can last you for 10 to 15 years, you need to pay 250,000 naira upfront. Obviously, it seems like a more expensive option, but that's because you're not looking at it on the grand scheme. Like, how much money am I saving on the long term? But obviously, like that's a very difficult argument to make when people are seeing that upfront cost, because upfront it's going to be a lot more expensive than owning a petrol generator. So companies are trying to find ways to kind of meet people where they are and come up with like financing options. Maybe it's pay as you go or like have it in instrumental payments. But then there's a problem in Nigeria as well, because you don't have a credit history. You can't just give someone something and someone the solar home and say that, okay, I trust you, they're going to pay me back over the next 24 months and you won't default on your payments or run away. You know, that kind of thing. So that's kind of like where the challenge is for people really embracing this technology. It's a much better option in the long run compared to like diesel or petrol generators. But in the short run, that upfront cost and the limitations of battery technology is what is really holding it back. And this is just in the Nigerian context. If you're looking at other countries where they have a more developed national grid and they can have things like wind or hydropower, and they actually have like a more complicated energy systems, they have different things that kind of meet their needs. But that just gives a good understanding of how technology really plays into the mix and what the limitations are and how it really affects on our individual consumer behavior. Like, what are we used to? What do we expect? What are we willing to pay for it? How conscious are we? Because I think it's fair to say that the average Nigerian doesn't care about climate change. You can't make that argument. I can't come to you and say that, oh, we should stop using a generator because it's making it's making noise, bringing out smoke. Those are good arguments, right? But a regular Nigerian doesn't care because, one, they're used to the noise of generator, and two, the smoke is just something that's just part of life. But if you come to them and say, oh, I can give you this technology that would save you money in the next 5 years and doesn't have this problem with you going out to buy petrol, and you don't have to deal with, like, if there's a fuel scarcity or something like that, and you don't have to deal with the noise, and it's always available, and it's your own system, and you can control everything. Like, just finding a way to shape the conversation in the way people want to listen to it. You don't want to start preaching to them about climate change and preaching to them about carbon emissions before you get them to like change their behavior and change their consumer habits. But you want to find out, how do you meet them where they are and start the conversation and find something that benefits them and also adds to the change that you're trying to make on a more global scale. So it's like thinking on a global mindset, but finding ways you can implement your strategies in a local community. And that's really how you should think about when it comes to climate change and how technology plays a role.
So in a moment, I want to ask you about the whole discussion of climate change and the political climate and the activism and the right approach for that. But first, you mentioned the energy systems. Can you just explain what these are and the roles they play?
Yeah, so let's just look at energy systems for a second. So basically, your energy system is, so let's say you're in a country like France, for instance. Now, your energy system is basically how that country generates its electricity or its energy. How does it meet the energy needs for all the citizens in France? So in France, for instance, now most of their generating capacity comes from, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but I'm just using as an example. About like 45% from nuclear, and then some 20% each from natural gas, and let's say 15% from solar and wind, and let's say 5% from hydropower. These are just like random numbers I'm throwing out there just to form a picture. And let's say in Nigeria, 90% of our generating capacity, 90% of our energy mix comes from natural gas and diesel. So if you look at these things, are just vastly different in different parts of the world. You can have some places where their energy system or their energy mix is based solely around coal. Let's say a country like South Africa, for instance. Now, most of the electricity